Hello guys and welcome to my second video from my channel KBTFootball. So today a few of the things I'm going to go over is just I was away at the York City friendly game yesterday, so I'm going to be talking about what I made of that, what I made of the couple of players I was happy to see, some of the others that I was actually quite surprised to see that were playing there, but also, as I promised in the last video, though I'm a little late, would be what needs to happen if I think, as Labris has said, the way I don't think it was Labris actually. I think it was Thomas Mounier in his interview when he joined. What we need to do if we're going to at least maintain the success we got last season, and what differences the fixture congestion and obviously the Europa League will bring, and what challenges that'll give Labris going into the new season, but also the recruitment team. So first of all, the game yesterday. I'm sure a lot of Sunderland fans would agree with us when I say that in the past we've went into a lot of pre-season games, especially against teams, like York Cities and your Gateshead, but in previous seasons, to be honest, not expecting that much. And I'm not going to lie, I went into this one kind of similarly. I thought we'd play a more balanced team between the two halves rather than what you'd say was a noticeably our first team, much more in the first half, and then a lot of our under-21s in the second. And I thought it was an encouraging sign from the start of it, because I thought it showed that the players that were starting from the beginning were probably Labris was quickly already deciding that he wanted to see what the best team he currently had available to him was, even though a lot of the players were away at the World Cup. But it was an absolutely emphatic start where we played, I think, really, really well. Our players looked a lot sharper and a lot fitter than I think they have in pre-seasons in previous years. And it just looks like that high-performance environment in training at the Academy of Light and stuff is starting to breathe through, and it was a really professional way to manage it. And even in the second half, when we played a lot of younger players, especially compared to the players that York had playing out there, I think we could argue who was the better team in the second half, certainly, but I think we'd all agree that our team was competitive, and it really showed. And it was talking again what I talked about last week about getting the academy players playing and learning the standards by playing with and having a good relationship with the first team. And I especially liked watching Enzo Lefebvre when he walked off the pitch at the end of the first half, when he had a warm embrace with Zach Johnson, and the both walked off together. And it was clear that in the not that long that them two have probably actually had to spend with each other, obviously now that he's moved to York City, that people of completely different parts of their careers clearly had a warm relationship. And it just shows that that there's a bit more of a connection than I think we've seen in the past with it. We scored some absolutely brilliant goals during the game. I was really impressed with Chris Riggs' composure for his goal. Enzo Lefebvre was brilliant pretty much throughout the entire half which he played. And I was also really impressed with Tima Tutierov's performance in the first half. And obviously it was an absolutely wonderful goal he scored. Yes, there was lots of other things I was impressed with. Not only the home and away support for it, I thought it was really good to see so many Sunderland fans going up to York more than a month before the Premier League season starts. And I think it was just a good day out for both teams. So that was my view on that in general. I won't look too much further into that. I think it was a successful pre-season outing before we go to America. Let's say that. So, when it comes for things that Regis Labris needs to consider this summer, the main thing that we've often seen, obviously in the last couple of years when teams have first came into the Premier League, is basically the gap being absolutely enormous and people struggling to stay in the division. Obviously this year, with Sunderland and Leeds staying up, it is the first time the last two seasons, or both, all three teams went straight back down. So it's changed this year. But something, again, that is often been a talking point in the Premier League is second season syndrome, where teams that have come up and had a really good first season have really struggled the following season because they have stuck to the way that they played in that initial season, with perhaps slightly less resources than some of the bigger teams and slightly less quality of player. And teams have played against the players twice, played against the coach twice, and it gets a little bit more difficult to play, let's say, surprise trump cards, and the game adapts. The Premier League adapts every single year. So I think the main things that we need to, I think we've done absolutely brilliant with our principles since we've came to the Premier League, and I don't think we should move away from any of them. The things I think that will need developing are, you've got to add new phases to the play, which is something Bris talks about a lot, which is, aside from the solid foundations of the team togetherness, we need to make sure that we are adding new ways of playing to our game, whether that's new rhythms of passing, new triangles, things that we practice in training, which can add a new dimension to our defence, but especially to our attack, and finding new ways of scoring goals. And this is what this pre-season will all be for. But it also comes from, and this is a lot to do with the recruitment team, possibly more so than Bris, but also we know that Bris likes to speak and have interviews with players before he decides whether or not he thinks this will be player to be useful for him. He has to bring players in, probably primarily, not just focusing on upgrading the level of players we have in certain positions, although that is certainly something he will need to look at, but is more about adding more different dimensions to our game to allow us to adapt across a season with more fixture congestion, more minutes, a wider variety of teams we'll be playing against, and obviously teams that we've already played twice last season now as well. So that then goes on the recruitment team and what they've got to do to try and back Bris into doing this. And I think this is mainly, to be honest with you, to do with, as I've said, but basically the same as what I said about Bris, in terms of they need to make sure they add players who can bring new dimensions to our game, but still fit with the core values of the club. We need ambitious players who want to play at the absolute highest level. And as our ownership have explained in the past, it's not just about bringing players who think, oh, we want a player who's going to stay with us and be loyal for a long time. It is about bringing a player in who has got that ambition to play at the very top, and whether he sees that future with us or not, that's kind of obviously up to them to deliver, but also up to us to show that we match their ambition and we continue to grow the club moving forward. And ultimately, the best thing to make a player stay with us long term, if they're performing well, is our overall team club performance and doing things like reaching the Europa League, which is also, obviously, I think everyone would, or I think everyone would, at least, whether they agree with it or not, they'd see how I believe that certainly players who did perform very well last season, who were going to have interest around them, as we knew, we found it difficult at some parts early in last summer to get players to come because of the lack of European football. But then the signing of Granit Xhaka and people like Nordi Mukiele kind of changed that a bit and made people a bit more willing to talk to us. But this year, being in the Europa League and going straight into it without having to qualify through the stages, which the Premier League teams don't have to, is something that's going to make players more keen to probably consider moving to us, but also may just give them, whether it's an extra year or whether it's all together, them realizing that we actually maybe are a good project for them over long term. It's going to keep them at the club. And we might lose some players anyway. We will lose some players anyway, whether that's because we're looking to offload some, or whether it's because their heads are turned by a spectacular offer for them somewhere else. It's undoubtedly a good thing that we've qualified for the Europa League in terms of retaining our best players. So, I mean, yes, since the last time I spoke to you, Thomas Meunier signed. I think that is a really quite a good acquisition, I'd say, in general. He adds another player of kind of Granit Xhaka's ilk, where he's got a huge, vast array of European experience, international experience, but also experience of playing for, top sides across Europe, like Paris Saint-Germain and Borussia Dortmund, but still playing at a fairly high level in Ligue 1 with a fairly good team in Lille last season. He's made it clear that he's still ambitious and he's still not ready to give up that competitive edge and move down to a lesser competitive division, and that he's still got that hunger. I saw him for his appearances in the World Cup, although he didn't play every game. And I thought, on the whole, in general, he was absolutely solid, and he didn't look like someone who looks like he needs to be hanging his boots up anytime soon. So all I've heard about him is positive. I know that he's a big, powerful player. I've heard that he's got that bit of aggression about him, that competitive edge, as I said. He's a player with a good engine on him. He's a good crosser of the ball, which is something I do think we could improve on. So, no, I think it's a great player to bring in, both for squad depth, experience, to help younger players learn from, especially Trey Hume, where they're playing a similar position. Hopefully they'll both get loads of minutes throughout the season, as well as Nordi Mukiele, who might play in that position. But we're going to have more games this year, and we might get further in the cups as well. And if we do, especially in the League Cup, because we did get through a couple of rounds of the FA Cup, but we went out in the first entry round that we were in the League Cup last season. We might need more squad depth to go with that. It's a good start. I think more players that are coming in will probably be looking at continuing the model of buying young players that we're going to unearth before they've hit the Premier League and hit the inflated market, so that we can get them early. Long contracts. But the only thing I would possibly add from my perspective is that if there was one standout thing other than plugging in gaps which we have got in the squad, I think one of the main things I would look for is potentially game-changing players. And what I mean by that is, I think one of the best examples I use is the year that Leeds first got promoted back to the Premier League after a long time. Not this time, but the previous time when they signed Rafinha, when Marcelo Bielsa was the manager. That's what I mean by a game changer. And they also, again, did that by finding someone who wasn't in a hyperinflated market yet, and they found him before eventually he ended up doing his big move to Barcelona. That is, by the way, not me for 1 second saying I expect our recruitment department to find another Rafinha. That would be a hugely tall order, although that's always the ambition. But, we've got to, what I mean is we've got to try and find a player. And I think specifically possibly in the wide areas where I do think we can improve, I think find a player who can, say, help create stuff, help create stuff every other game, get the fans off their seats and, have an eye for goal, the same kind of way like a player like Jack Clark did in the Championship, where he can help us on this season. Because as well as defending really well, which I think I'm fairly optimistic about going into the next season, but obviously we'll have to maintain the standards and increase the squad depth. But yes, I certainly think that going into the new season, adding a little bit more variety and numbers and attack will be able to help us to perhaps reach another level and actually be able to go into some games, especially in Europe and domestic competitions, on the front foot, because it would be good to see us trying to gain slightly more control of games in some situations, even though we did really great surrender and quite a lot of control at times last year. So that's going to be the end of this video for me. I'll be back with another video, I think by the end of the week, and that'll be me going through all the players we currently have in our squad and basically a general overview of what I've thought of them over however long they've been at the club, what I think the future role could be for us, and yeah, generally what I think the future could hold for them if things go well. So it was great to see you guys. It was if you like the video, obviously do a like, do a comment if you want to say anything, make any suggestions. It's not going to be perfect my videos at the start because I'm just starting up. I'm not being overly obsessive about over presentation or over editing or editing at all. I'll be honest with you when I'm doing it at the start. It's just for fun for me at the moment, and it's just about seeing where it goes. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll speak to you at the end of the week.